Should your lighting be personal or strategic? Now, most experts who are outside of the fields of photography or video may never have a reason to actually think about whether lighting is personal or strategic when it comes to communicating with your audience. However, when it comes to a coach or an expert who wants to convert or connect better when they're making their presentations, and they really want to optimize that presentation for said conversion and connection, then they really need to be asking these types of questions, or at least they need to be asked these types of questions by an appropriate person who understands the impact of all of the elements of presentation. And these are the kinds of questions that will make the difference between what we call a regular expert and a world-class expert. Now, of course, you might be thinking, Patrick, does this really matter to my audience? Is my audience sat there wondering, is this strategic or is this personal? Well, this is not necessarily the language of your audience, but I want you to think about lighting as either functional or creative. And lighting being functional or creative falls into really two different concepts. And so when we start to talk about lighting being strategic, what we're talking about is a bit more functional. And when we start to talk about the personal element, well, it's a bit more about you as a person. Now, let's go into why lighting is designed versus lighting just being pulled together. If you go to a factory or an office, if you've ever worked in an office, then you'll know that the lighting is set, it's optimized so that people can work without fatigue, that they can probably work in climates where there is a winter and it gets darker during the day. Then you want to make sure that people are able to see for safety's sake, but also to work, to function without eye strain and fatigue. And the same goes for a factory. You want to make sure that people have adequate lighting so that they can see and carry out the functions that they need to be carrying out without any concern that they cannot see what they're doing properly, especially when it comes to high quality manufacturing. Then you need to make sure that your lighting is on point. But let's contrast that, or even compare it for a moment, against the lighting in your favorite restaurant. Now, if you don't have a favorite restaurant, just insert your favorite place to visit that's a commercial space. Have you noticed that the lighting, say, in your favorite restaurant has been set in a completely different way to the lighting that you'll experience when you're in, say, a factory or a place of work, or even your own home? Have you noticed that there's a difference about the lighting? And in, say, a favorite restaurant, I'll pick this as an example that I think we can all, to some extent, associate our experiences with, is how does that lighting in the restaurant make you feel? How does that connect with you when you're having a wonderful meal? See, the lighting has been designed, and if it's done right, it creates what we call the ambience in the restaurant. It's one of the things that you're going to look at and say, I really enjoy coming to this restaurant because of the lighting. When we illuminate correctly with the lighting, well, we can express ourselves, right? We can share our identity. We can create a mood. We can actually explore a narrative, or we can even mimic seasons. Now, that's just a part of the list. I could go on and on, but I just want to anchor that with you for a while. So when I asked you, how did you feel about the lighting in your favorite restaurant? I was alluding to the fact that lighting evokes feelings within us. It evokes an emotive response. And for you and your audience, when you go into that restaurant, or when you appear online live in front of your audience, we're actually tapping into something that is subconscious. It's happening below the level of awareness for most of us. And we refer to that as the subconscious. And the thing about the subconscious is it acts incredibly quickly. And sometimes we get a feeling, we just get this sense that this isn't right. And a lot of the time it's because of our subconscious is picking up on something that it's responding to at the speed before we can even comprehend what's going on. And that's how quick our subconscious can actually be triggered. And we want to make sure that our lighting isn't doing that to our audience. Now, whether your lighting is a more functional lighting or a more creative lighting, all lighting setups will evoke something. And my hope for you is that you're not triggering something which turns your audience away. And especially if you're doing that without being aware, because you might have just copied someone else's lighting style and thought that will work for me. But here's the thing, when we look at lighting, especially if you've been in the world of photography or video, as I have for a long period of time, and especially if you've also been teaching, training people, imparting knowledge, helping to shape people's minds over the online space, then you realize that all of these elements need to work together. And so we are, whether we are aware of it or not, making a choice to be personal or strategic. We're doing what we want to do for ourselves, or we're doing something that we know has a little bit more of a sense of order and structure around it, something that can be implemented and duplicated by just about anyone. That's the difference between something that's personal and something that's strategic. Personal is what I like. Strategic is what we know works because we can actually test and measure. Now, I just want to bring in something which, again, you might be able to connect with through a previous experience, or if you haven't previously, you can go ahead and try this for yourself. Now, I'm not saying you have to go to Edinburgh, but one of the places that I enjoy going to is, in fact, Edinburgh. And Edinburgh is a place where there's lots of history. It's got a lot of places that are steeped in Scottish history. And in particular, there's a cathedral known as St. Giles Cathedral, sometimes just called St. Giles. And there's some beautiful stained glass windows that are in this building. Incredibly old building by the standards of most buildings around the world. And so it's steeped in, as I said, history, but also there's that sense in which there's a story being told through these stained glass windows, and where they're positioned and how the light comes in. It's to evoke a particular feeling among the people who visit this cathedral. Now, also in Edinburgh, there's a building called the Edinburgh Dungeon. And the whole point of that building is very, very different to the St. Giles Cathedral. And so the lighting in the dungeon is, as you would imagine, designed to evoke a sense of fear and foreboding within a visitor's thoughts, in their hearts, in their minds. And so the idea is that we want to make sure that our lighting suits the intention of the experience that we are trying to create. And so the very feeling that's being created inside St. Giles is a completely different feeling. It's one of trying to connect you to a higher power, whereas the dungeon is all about replicating the fear that someone would have felt if they were in that space. So here's the thing, is your lighting, because you may be preferring things to be on a more personal level, is your lighting evoking that sense of the personal? And so what I want you to start to think about now is, if you're doing things the way you want them done, the way you like for things to be done, what feels good to you, then you might be doing that at the expense of how it might come across to your audience. Remember, there's stuff happening at the subconscious level, which is so fast that you or I have no idea of how quickly we're probably turning our audiences away from what we're about to say. Remember, this happens so fast that we don't even get a chance to measure it. It just happens at the speed almost of a person being introduced to your lighting. Now, of course, when it comes to coaches and experts, one of the things that they often say to me is, Patrick, I need to be authentic. I need to be genuine and real. I want my audience to really know who I am, and I want them to connect with these parts of me. But here's the thing, when we start to get really personal and we start to go into the tastes that we have as individuals, we can start to niche ourselves so far down that there's only a very small number of people who will be able to connect with us. And this is a challenge that many of my coaches and experts kind of get themselves boxed into. is that it can be so personal because they are the brand, they are the business, and they often feel that, well, that's the thing to go for. And in the beginning, that may work for you. But especially if, like me, you want to work with corporates, and I have worked with corporates for a number of years, over 2 decades, possibly even longer that I've worked with corporates. And so I know that there are things that you need to do when you're working with corporates. There are ways to think that help with a corporate. Now, if you're more interested in being strategic, then here's the thing. Strategic is really hand in hand with business. If you are going to run a business, be a part of a business, then the word strategy is going to come up quite a lot. And what strategy is really the opposite of the personal. Strategy is about looking at things that we can implement that we know work because someone else has already used it. It's a trusted, a tested, and a deployable method by which we can do something. And even if you might be thinking, I'm the kind of coach who only does something that's really expert and niche, then you can still benefit from having some tried, trusted, and tested methodology with the way that you do things. And I don't want you to have to go and study all of this stuff about lighting. I've put all of that time and effort into it. And if you really are focused on strategy, then I'm happy to be the person to help you, to guide you through the process. But that's only if that's what you want. And one of the ways that you can make sure that you're not subconsciously disconnecting your audience from your lighting is, as I said, to become that expert yourself and to look at what works and what doesn't work. Because there are some things that actually do not work. And we've been to enough movies and we've watched enough things on television to know that there are some things in lighting that just do not work. They might appear for a while, then you never see it again. But if you are getting serious about that and you want to make sure that your audience sees you in the right light, then it's time to think strategic about your lighting. Even if you might think, I'm not ready yet, now's the time to start thinking about it because you're separating yourself from all the other experts who may know as much as you, but have not given as much thought to the way that they present and the way that they appear online. It's really time for your audience to see you in the best light. I think that you owe that to yourself and to your audience. And it's time for you to become more strategic. Now, if you think that you're ready, you're definitely ready. If you're questioning whether or not you're ready, I would still say have the conversation. And as well as asking you to do things like to like and subscribe, I want you to let me know how I can help you to get started with looking at things from a much more strategic lens. I really want to say to you that I appreciate the time that you have invested in watching or listening, depending on how you're engaging with this particular presentation. Thank you, because your time is precious and there's only so much that we get, and I appreciate you investing that time with me. I'm Patrick Nairn. It's a pleasure to serve you. And as always, I leave you in peace. See you soon.